Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at paper 1, the thematic study. This is going to be on question 5 or question 6, which you'll have a choice of. How far do you agree? The 16-mark essay style question. Firstly, a bit of an introduction about the Pearson Edexcel paper 1 exam. It has two main components. The thematic study, medicine in Britain, circa 1250 to present would be one example, although other topics are taught too. And the historic environment or source inquiry. For example, the one that goes with medicine in Britain is the British sector of the Western Front 1914 to 1918, injuries, treatment and the trenches. For that part of the paper there'll be a sources booklet which is included. You'll have 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete this exam, and that's for both sections. As it happens, the historic environment comes first, that's section A, and then the thematic study is section B. This particular video is going to look at the final question, where you'll have a choice of 2 essay style answers to write. These questions are the ones that you will probably spend longest on in the exam if you're doing them right. So let's get into it. For section B, you'll have to answer questions 3 and 4. That's the 4-mark difference or similarity question and the 12-mark explain question. And then either question 5 or question 6. So you'll actually get a choice here. I'm going to concentrate on question 5 from the 2018 exam, which is pretty typical. But you should choose the one which you feel most comfortable answering, the one that you know most about and the one that you understand best. Bear in mind too that this question will typically have 4 additional marks for spelling, punctuation, grammar and the use of specialist terminology. So pay particular attention to the quality of your writing here, as that can really help boost your grade. When we break down this question, we need to really consider what is being asked of us. So let's consider the issue at stake in question 5. There was little progress in the understanding of the cause of disease in the years 1250 to 1700. How far do you agree? Explain your answer. So first of all, you've got to decide whether you more agree with that statement or more disagree. You could even note this down as part of your plan. Bear in mind though that this is a 16-mark question, so you're going to have to answer both sides. You do get some help though. You may use the following in your answer. Well, you don't have to, but you may do so. The Great Plague in London in 1665 and Thomas Sydenham. As long as you know about those two things, it's worth mentioning them in relation to the question, because at least you know that they're definitely going to be valid. However, to get full marks, you must also provide information of your own. So when you've got both questions in front of you, you choose one of these questions. Then I'd always recommend writing a very brief plan if that helps you. But definitely decide how far you agree. That is what you've got to do to actually answer this question. And you should spend about 25 minutes on this answer. So when you're considering how far, you might think to a large extent, to some extent, come up with some sort of answer. If I was going to add my own knowledge to this, I might jot down a few ideas as well. So we're thinking about progress in the understanding of the cause of disease. Well, I know that throughout this period, the 4 humours, miasma and religious explanations for disease were always valid. So I'd note that down and I'll try and mention them. I also know that Thomas Sydenham kind of bucked this trend a little bit towards the end of the period, as he believed that disease was caused by natural causes rather than religious ones. So now I've got something of a plan together and I've got an idea as to what I'm going to write. Let's consider what the mark scheme's actually asking of us. So for this question, you are going to be tested on your analysis of and evaluation of second order concepts, in this case changing continuity. And you're also going to be judged on your knowledge and understanding of features and characteristics of the period. There are 10 marks for your analysis and 6 marks for your knowledge, so they're both important, but you would have to make sure that you're constantly explaining in relation to the question. And don't forget those spelling, punctuation and grammar marks for an additional 4. Let's look at the differences between levels 3 and 4 on the mark scheme. We're not going to look at levels 1 and 2 because you want to be aiming a bit higher than that. Here in level 3 it says showing some analysis which is mainly directed at the question, whereas in level 4 it's an analytical explanation which is directed consistently at the question. Accurate and relevant information is including showing good knowledge, whereas knowledge is precisely selected to address the question, showing a wide-ranging knowledge and understanding for level 4. In simple terms then, for level 4 you keep on at your argument and you keep referring back to it, and you're using lots of examples, whereas for level 3 it might not be quite as precise as that. The overall judgment is given with some justification for level 3, whereas criteria for the required judgment are justified and applied in the process of reaching the overall judgment for level 4. That's a bit of a mouthful that, but effectively what it means is you're considering lots of different ways in which that judgment is correct rather than just 1 or 2. Don't forget though that you get a maximum of 11 marks if you don't go beyond those points raised in the earlier question, which was the Great Plague of London in 1665 and Thomas Sydenham. Let's have a look at an example first paragraph. I provided some colour coding here, but also make sure that you mark off your chosen question number. Here we're looking at question 5. I've colour coded point, example, explain, link and evaluate. This is a structure which can help you make sure that you're getting enough AO1 and AO2 within your answer, and it's something that I encourage my students to do, although it's not the only way of writing an effective answer. But hopefully it'll help break up the way that I've approached this. I'm going to start by the ways that I know that support the statement that there was little progress. So let's get into it. In some ways, there was little progress in the understanding of the cause of disease between 1250 and 1700. This is shown in how people reacted to the Great Plague in London in 1665. There are many similarities between how people explained the plague in the 1600s and how the Black Death was explained in the 1340s. In both cases, religious explanations were put forward and people prayed for forgiveness. The miasma theory also had a significant role in explanations of both outbreaks, as did explanations relating to the theory of the four humours. So I'm showing some really good AO1 knowledge there. This shows a lack of progress in the understanding of the cause of disease, as religious and ancient theories as to the cause of disease still predominated. This shows that there was little change in the understanding of the cause of disease between 1250 and 1700, as although there were some differences in the approach to fighting off the plague, such as burning bonfires in the streets of London in 1665, these were based on essentially the same ideas as in the 1300s. So far, I've related it back to this idea of change in continuity in the cause of disease. And here I've given some examples of continuity. I've shown that actually really between 1250 and 1700, there aren't a huge number of differences. But have I really made my argument yet? No, not quite, which is why I add in a bit of an evaluation. This makes me agree with the view that there was little change, as although the Great Plague was only one example, it shows a large amount of continuity with another earlier example of a similar outbreak, in this case, the Black Death. So here I'm saying that I do agree with the statement, so I'm putting forward my judgment right away. And I've got to remain consistent with that, even into my next paragraph, where I will consider what examples of progress in the understanding of the cause of disease there have been. So let's have a look at my counter-argument. I get some marks for AO2 here, because I have answered the question, and I get some marks for AO1 and AO2 here, showing the change in continuity. I get some marks for AO1 and AO2 here, but not that many. My link back to the question is related to AO2 because I'm looking at the continuity in the cause of disease, and I really get AO2 marks for that where I'm stating my judgment. Let's consider this counter-argument. Is it a successful one? There was progress in medicine because of the work of Vesalius and Harvey. Andreas Vesalius discovered a lot about the human body through dissection of human bodies. He wrote his findings in the book Fabric of the Human Body. This included detailed pictures which helped others learn. William Harvey built on this by examining how the blood circulates in the body. This overturned Galen's idea that the blood was used up like a fuel. This means that there was progress in medicine because the work of Harvey and Vesalius overturned some of the mistakes that Galen had made, allowing people to know more about how the body works. Okay, so this is my counter-argument. Is it any good? Well, it seems to start all right because I'm giving some relevant examples, but are they really that well chosen? Let's consider that. Here, we'll see that it starts to fall apart. This is referring to knowledge of the human body and anatomy. The question is specifically asking me about theories about the cause of disease, and so actually this wouldn't be credited. My counter-argument, therefore, is really weak. Let's give it a second go. Okay, I've shown you one unsuccessful counter-argument. Let's have a look at a better example. I'm still writing about question number 5, but here goes. However, in other ways, there was progress in the understanding of the cause of disease. See, I'm relating it to the question now. Thomas Sydenham was a good example of this progress. Sydenham found his studies at the university interrupted by the English Civil War, and so his learning was less influenced by the teaching of ancient ideas of Galen. As a result of this, Sydenham was more inclined to use Hippocrates' clinical observation and diagnosis as a basis for being more inquiring about the cause of disease. He concluded that disease had a natural cause, and prayer was not directly effective. Consequently, Sydenham was able to identify specific diseases, such as Sydenham's cholera, and recommended specific natural treatments based upon this. This led to progress in the understanding of the cause of disease, as other physicians would be more inclined to seek new explanations for illness. However, in my view, the impact of this was relatively limited. Although Sydenham argued that disease had natural causes, he was still largely focused on old ideas for explaining the cause, such as humorism, which shows continuity too. Let's consider where I've picked up the marks here and how I've related it back to the question. So I've got something that's directly related to the question here because I am referring specifically to the cause of disease, and I've given good supporting knowledge about Thomas Sydenham here, which was one of the stimulus points. But I've had to go beyond that and actually look at both the detailed knowledge about what Sydenham believed and how that relates to the question. So good AO1 and AO2 marks for this paragraph here. I've related it back to the cause of disease again here, and now I relate it back to my argument. In my first paragraph, I said that I agreed that there was limited progress, and I've got to stick with that now. So here I'm saying why, even though I know that there was some progress with Sydenham, it wasn't as significant as the lack of progress, and I've explained why. So the evaluation section really shows that I understand my argument and I've stuck with it. Of course, we cannot really nail down our justification without having a look at the conclusion, and that's what we'll do now. Remember with the mark scheme, in our conclusion we need to justify on the basis of several different types of criteria. So here's how I've done it. Overall, I agree to a large extent that there was little progress in the cause of disease between 1250 and 1700. Although some religious ideas were less prominent as the power of the church declined during the Renaissance, most of the theories of the cause of disease that existed by 1700 were similar to those that had existed in the medieval period. This meant that those doctors who were beginning to reject some religious and ancient ideas as to the cause of disease were still largely focused on the ideas of miasma and humorism to explain why people became unwell. Therefore, despite some progress, there is far more continuity in the understanding of the cause of disease between 1250 and 1700, meaning I strongly agree with the statement in the question. While there was medical progress in this period, much of the rejection of old ideas, such as the work of Vesalius and Harvey, improved knowledge of anatomy and physiology rather than improving the understanding of the cause of disease. So I've really justified how far I agree in that first paragraph. I've added some supporting detail here and here, and I've explained why I so strongly believe that there was more continuity, including a few extra examples too. Also, my spelling, punctuation and grammar looks pretty good. I've used paragraphs, I've written a lot, and that should get me my 4 marks of spelling, punctuation and grammar too. Although admittedly, in the time that I had, I could have included more examples. I was working under a slightly kind of false atmosphere here though, in that I needed to try and fit the text onto a screen in a readable and legible way. So I hope you'll forgive me if you think, wow, there's loads of things that he missed out. Let's have a look at 2 more example questions from past papers. Firstly, question 6 from the 2018 paper. Providing access to care and treatment has been the most important development in the role of government in medicine in the years 1800 to present. They've given you as stimulus points the National Health Service and the Public Health Act, but there's loads of other things that you could talk about here as well. You could look at the National Insurance Act and how that basically helped the government pay for healthcare, and the importance therefore are things like sick pay. You could also look at the impact of things like the Public Health Act and other laws that improve public health. So either you could agree that yes, the most important thing that government did was access to care and treatment with things like national insurance and the National Health Service, or you could look more down the public health route and talk about the improvements there. It would be up to you. This next one's got some strange date ranges, and this comes from the 2018 paper. The advances in surgery made in the years 1700 to 1900 were more significant than advances in surgery made in the period 1900 to the present. You may use the following in your answer: antiseptics and transplants. You must also use information of your own. Right, let's consider this one here then. So between 1700 and 1900, you got loads of advances. You could start with advances in antiseptics, for example, with Joseph Lister. You could look at anaesthetics with Simpson and chloroform and ether and other types of anaesthetics that were brought in. We could look at the move towards more aseptic surgery where germs aren't present at all. You could look at the carbolic spray. There's tons and tons you could look at. Real revolution in surgery in that date range. But from 1900 to present, you could look at the expansion of different types of surgery, for example, cancer surgery, transplant surgery, things like Christian Barnard and the first heart transplant, loads you could look at. So again, you could argue that there are advances in both, but then argue which one you think is more significant. If you want to have a go at either of those, you can pause the video here. Or if you're doing a different topic, we'll have a look at some examples for that too. If you're one of my students, you don't have to worry about the next two questions because they're not for the exam that we're doing. However, I used to teach warfare through time, and I remember this question from the 2018 paper. Changes in the nature of warfare in the periods 1500 to 1700 were more significant than changes of the nature of warfare in the periods 1700 to 1900. You may use the following in your answer: new model army and heavy artillery. Again, stacks that you could talk about here. So from 1500 to 1700, we got the adoption of gun weapons and a greater emphasis on training, particularly when it comes to a new model army and the way that a greater level of professionalism, pay and training was introduced during the English Civil War. Whereas from 1700 to 1900, you could look at the adoption of new weapons, things like rifled guns, things like heavy artillery, and their use in the Crimean War. Stacks you could talk about. Or the development of war reporting was the most important reason for changes in popular attitudes towards war in the period 1800 to present. Well, you could have a think about the realism with which people understood war. William Russell was included in the Crimean War, and his vivid reports altered people's attitudes, and conscription meant that more people actually experienced war firsthand and then would report back on it. More people therefore were directly affected in the era of the Industrial Revolution. Or, if you're doing crime and punishment, you could have a go at these. This isn't something that I teach, but it is something that I've got a bit of an interest in. The Norman Conquest 1066 led to significant changes in law enforcement in medieval England. How far do you agree? You may use the following in your answer: weregild, so that was a form of compensation where you would pay compensation for injuring or killing somebody, with the amount paid depending on how badly you'd hurt them or the rank of person that you had killed. And tithings, this is the tax that was given. Well, there are lots of significant changes in law enforcement in medieval England, but you could also consider some of the other ones that the Normans included, things like trial by combat, and also looking at some of the changes as Parliament's power increased as well. What about question number 6? There was little change in the nature of criminal activity in the period 1500 to 1900. How far do you agree? And you could look at poaching and highway robbery, the incidences of those crimes, and also different crimes that arose during that time. Some final points then. The 16-mark how far do you agree questions require detailed knowledge, but mostly a strong and consistent argument. You'll be provided with 2 stimulus points which you may use, but you'll need to include examples from your own knowledge too. You will need to explain your opinion in terms of how far, to a large extent, to a limited extent. Do you disagree? Whatever you think, explain how far and fully support your answer. So this has been rather longer than most of the rapid revision videos, but that's hardly surprising given the depth and the detail of the question at hand. So thanks very much for watching. If you've managed to make it this far, I hope it's been useful to you, and if it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you're desperate for me to cover something else in the rapid revision series, then pop it in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. But for now, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.